Hi everyone, my name is Rhea Bandaru and I'm part of the Questrom School of Business, and today I'm going to be talking about my Keystone called The Ideal Woman Leader, exploring behaviors and perceptions of women in corporate leadership, and my advisor is Dr. Preston. So as a brief disclaimer before delving into my lit review, I just wanted to acknowledge that all analyses and comments going forward will be through the scope of gender rather than biological sex. This is important to acknowledge as gender is the basis for the social norms and expectations that we experience within society. Additionally, I just wanted to mention that we will only be focusing on two gender identities today, that of a woman and that of a man, as there is not enough substantive research to be able to make comparative analyses about other gender identities. And lastly, I wanted to acknowledge the importance of intersectionality and the experiences that people have in the workplace. However, this lit review focuses more on an overarching view of women in corporate leadership as a collective. Just to give you guys an overview of what my research questions are, today we're going to be discussing what are the key behaviors and leadership styles that women, or the ideal woman leader, exhibits in the workplace. And as a result, how do these perceptions of her as a leader impact her success in the workplace? Just to give you guys a little bit more context, my lit review will be focusing on the period between 1970 to 2005. And this is a particularly transformative period for women ascending into leadership, as this is when women really just started to enter in masses. And this was primarily driven by second wave feminism between the 1960s to the 80s, which focused both on educational and workplace reform and equality. So much so that by 1972, we experienced our first female CEO in the S&P 500 with Katharine Graham at the Washington Post. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, by 1976, around 21% of managers were women. And by 1999, that number had more than doubled to 46%. And continuing in a trend of upward growth, by 2005, according to The Catalyst, which is a nonprofit focusing on equality for women in the workplace, the number of people in management and professional roles were over 50% women. In terms of the overview for my lit review, we'll predominantly be focusing on male-dominated business corporate settings, specifically within the industries of consulting and finance. And it's important to note that the executive boards for these industries are still predominantly male. In terms of my lit review, we'll be focusing on a wide variety of sources, including meta-analyses in which the authors were able to look through hundreds of studies to identify general trends, independent studies, as well as business and scholarly articles, and finally, personal anecdotes. I wanted to highlight the importance of personal anecdotes as mentioned by researchers, as it would be difficult to conceptualize the experiences that women have in the workplace. Additionally, they do acknowledge that within controlled studies, people are often more aware of their biases, so it might not exactly be reflective of the experiences women have in the workplace. And with that, I'm going to be talking about the three general trends that I noticed within my lit review, but one thing I did want to acknowledge before delving into that was that some of the information that I'm going to be presenting today in terms of my trends and some of the theories might seem a little bit obvious, and that's because it is. A lot of the things that we know about women in the workplace are well known and well documented within society, but it's important to acknowledge the research, the studies, the findings, and all of the different stories that essentially collude to our understanding of women in the workplace today, and eventually to help us eradicate these potential gender biases now and in the future. So essentially, the first trend that I'm going to be talking about today is that there are strong gender-based behavioral stereotypes between women and men in the workforce, specifically at the executive level. However, I just wanted to highlight that gender is not necessarily an automatic indicator of what behaviors people are going to exhibit in the workplace. It's more so an influence that creates both external and internal pressures. For example, if a woman were to go and work in a male-dominated corporate setting and she was in a similar position as a man, she might be more inclined to display more of those masculine qualities just because of the social norms of that workplace. However, that doesn't necessarily lead to the erasure of gender-based stereotypes. Essentially, according to theories like the expectation states theory, when people group together as a collective for a similar purpose, essentially coming to work, they have these grouped expectations, essentially called social status. And these are beliefs about different groups of people, and they pit them against each other, essentially believing that one group might have better qualities in terms of leadership or just like different beliefs in general. And that is solidified by the sex role spillover theory, essentially, which is the bringing of gender roles into the workplace. This is essentially equating women to being like that nurturing caretaker, and men be as like that aggressive, more independent breadwinner mentality. And this transitions into my second trend that I noticed, essentially just talking about how Gender and managerial stereotypes create warring expectations for women leaders. Essentially, this goes into role congruity theory. As we mentioned earlier with gender roles, women are expected to be more focused on interpersonal relationships, more collaborative, essentially just kinder, focusing on like the person, versus with the managerial stereotypes are more commonly associated with more agentic qualities, more masculine qualities. As I mentioned with the highly popularized campaign during the 2000s called Think Manager, Think Male. So there is that established mentality of having to behave within your gender role, but also within the leadership double bind, also being like managerial, like claiming those qualities, being agentic, as you can see, like having that scale, having that balance. However, it is noted that across studies, women in general were rated less effectively when pitted against their male peers if ranked by male evaluators. Additionally, if they displayed any more masculine characteristics, especially in male-dominated environments, essentially just meaning if they veered in any way towards more masculine or just masculinity in the workplace, it seems that they were not evaluated as efficient or as favorably. However, it's also well known that collaborative styles and more communal behaviors were also not seen as conducive to leadership behaviors. And with that, I wanted to go to my final trend that acknowledges workplace expectations. Women and men choose to lead differently. And here are just two leadership style continuums that I showed up here. Earlier, it used to be democratic versus autocratic, but it has since transformed. Essentially looking into transformational, which is what women are typically associated with. This is more focused on interpersonal behaviors, and it shows different communal attributes, but the best communal attributes that is viewed as acknowledging the lack of authority that women feel within management positions is when they're not displaying more agentic qualities. Overall, it's known that women do lead with the transformational style, and that has been noted across multiple studies that are not analyzing gender. That is the most effective style. However, due to selection bias, it's not unlikely that women, just because of the gender biases and stereotypes they experience in the workplace, are adopting the most effective style because they need to be seen as the best. And with that, I just wanted to end on a discussion of who is or what is the ideal women leader. Essentially, just based on research, it's easy to say that they find the perfect blend of communal or agentic traits. However, it's not possible to please everyone. It's not possible to go into a working environment and cater to everybody around you and have both that perfect blend of feminine and masculine styles. However, it is like ideal if the best or the ideal woman leader would find a set of styles or leadership behaviors that would be best catered to her personal skill sets and what her personal beliefs or like strengths are in the workplace. And in terms of a longer term goal, like making the efforts to fight gender bias in the workplace and having better equality within these executive boards would be ultimately what would lead us to success in having more ideal women leaders. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my presentation, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. I have two questions. One is, could you say a little bit more about transformational and transactional and what those work styles entail? Transactional does not sound very positive or something. It sounds like robotic, so I'm just curious about that. And the other question I had is, do you think that asking people to be aware of their work styles or asking leaders to be aware or to articulate their values, does that happen now, and would that be helpful to have people reflect on what their own styles of leadership are?
Yeah, of course. And then I guess speaking to the leadership continuum first, though transactional leadership definitely doesn't have a very positive sounding name, it's not necessarily like an ineffective style. It's something that's definitely geared towards more agentic qualities, essentially maintaining like that office hierarchy that we're all so familiar with, especially during that time period, during the 1970s to 2005. So I guess just to speak on it, it is kind of like what the name sounds like, essentially just performing tasks for your manager, and in return they either provide you with a reward or a punishment. It's just like to put it in simple terms. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not effective. I guess it depends on the industry that it might be applied within. And then for the second question, you asked me about like identifying what leadership style, if you think that would still be beneficial in the future.
What about whether it's a norm now for leaders to talk about their own leadership styles, and whether you think it would be useful if leaders were asked to sort of reflect on and articulate their own leadership styles.
Yeah, of course. And I do still think that it is the norm to have people like talk about what their leadership styles are, especially now. I think despite the fact that I chose a time period that's not exactly modern, people like gendered leadership styles is a constantly growing area of research, and people are continuously trying to add more studies, more anecdotes, more different like styles of leadership to gain an understanding of how do we best accommodate women leaders and like what are they doing now currently that might be either contributing to their success or like hurting them essentially. And if I think that people should continue to do so, I do think so, because I think without acknowledging the current state of leadership, especially within corporate, it will be difficult to make amends going forward to eradicate those gender biases. So I do think it's important to acknowledge what behaviors go into specific leadership traits and how we can move forward with that.
What was one of the anecdotes that stood out to you?
So this is more of a court case that I thought was really interesting. It was very well popularized. It was Ann Hopkins in PwC. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of that. But essentially, this was when she was under consideration for being chosen as a partner. However, she was passed. And at the time, it made no sense because she had a series of very positive evaluations at work. And when she approached the question, essentially what they told her is that you're not friendly, you don't dress well, you're not attractive. So she had catered to more, I guess, like agentic, like the masculine style of leadership. And this went all the way to the Supreme Court. And I think this was the first court case that they brought in like social scientists and social research to essentially back her up. So like those were some of the anecdotes that I think were extremely pivotal in understanding the experiences women go through.
Thanks for that presentation. It strikes me that in the same period you're looking at, the non-managerial workforce has changed a lot also, and there are a lot more women in non-management roles in corporate workplaces as well. So I'm curious if you saw anything about how the changes in who is being managed has changed how corporate leadership is perceived.
Yeah, no, I do think that plays a significant role. I mentioned that when there is a woman leader, especially when she is displaying more masculine leadership styles, but even if she's not, when she has male subordinates, they tend to evaluate her as less efficient than if they had a male leader. So coming in, if there are like more like female subordinates, like more women within the workforce, even at a non-managerial level, I think that would lead to changing perceptions in the workforce.
Okay. Is it useful to retain these binaries of male and female, right? When maybe instead it could be more incentivizing, right? To instead qualify, like actually describe things as just certain leadership qualities, right? And then that way you allow for, like for men to also say, actually, I identify with what would normally, right? Like if we take that away and they don't have to say like, yes, I have a more feminine style of leadership, right? And then also for the spectrum sort of in between, right? Then we also have a lot more room. Like is there any benefit to keeping these binaries in our research and in how we communicate our research?
I mean, I personally don't think that leadership styles and behaviors should be gendered. I just think that they are, especially within research. And as you have mentioned, like men are like less incentivized to take on more like communal characteristics if they feel like it's more femininely associated. And that's been shown in studies. Essentially in like working environments, men and women don't necessarily show different levels of agentic qualities, but they do show different levels of communal qualities. And I think that just might be because of that like feminine association with using those traits. So I don't necessarily think that there is a benefit in leaving it gendered, but I do think a lot of the existing research, especially within this time period, are gendered.
Thank you so much, folks. That will be the end of this Q&A. Thank you once again.
Thank you.